Namasrishtham manumapi shachi sutamatra svarūpam rūpam tasyagrajam urupurim mathurim goshtavatim radha kundam girivara-maho radhika madhavasam prapto yasya pratita-kripaya sri gurum tam natosmi nindantam pulakotkarena vikasat nipaprasuna chavim prodvikritya bhujadvayam hari hari tyuchairvadantam moho nrityam tangaladasru nirjarachayaiha sinchantamurvitalam gayantam nijaparshadaih parivritam tam gorameva stumaha alibhih paripalitah prabalitah sanandamalokitah pratyasam sumanah phalodaya vidho samodamamoditah brindaranya bhuvi prakasha madhurak sarvatishayi sriya radha madhavayoh pramodayatu mam ullasa kalpadrumah. Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Sri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Gosai Rakori Charana Bandhan Jaha hoite Bignanas Abhishta Puran. Jai Sri Radhe. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe. My dear friends, welcome back. I'm very glad that I have one or two people who are following through on these lectures. Even if there's only one person, of course, we see from the great acharyas that they are happy if one person, if they can have contact with one person and relish the topics of Krishna Katha with them. So I know that right now we're in a difficult part of the text. Jiva Goswami is reviewing the contents, or at least some specific parts of Paramatma Sandarbha and Tattva Sandarbha. And so I've been, and in doing so, he's also covering a lot of the Vedanta Pramans and quoting material from the Upanishads, from the Shruti, because of course this is the main terrain of Vedanta, and we can prove, let's say, more easily the Vaishnava principles from a selection of Puranic verses, including the Bhagavatam. But the Bhagavatam itself places itself in the tradition of the Vedanta, right? From the very beginning, from the very first opening words, janmadhyasya yathā, which is a direct quote from the Vedanta Sutra, or sarva vedanta saram hi, and sarva vedanta saram yat, that brahmatmaika darshanam, vastu tad advitiyam cha kaivalya prayojanam. That is the expressions that are given there in the Bhagavatam, claiming adherence to the Vedanta. So the statements of the Vedanta, we were talking in the last class about goni and mukhya vrittis. So there are statements in the Vedanta which have as their mukhya vritti the statements related to the non-duality, or to the fact that Brahman has no parts, it has no internal differences, no external differences. There's nothing there. It can have no internal parts. It can have nothing external to it. And so all these different kinds of bheda, the three kinds of bheda, are not present in Brahman. So now how to deal with the fact that we say that the jiva and prakriti, that these things are separated, bhinne prakriti ashtadha, as it's stated in Bhagavad Gita, and apareyam itastvanyam prakriti vidhime param. So in the Gita it talks about two kinds of prakriti, the external prakriti and the jiva. And of course we have the internal energy, but the internal energy, it appears to be different. It appears that there are varieties there. But in any case, none of these energies is actually outside the oneness of the Supreme Brahman. So these are the kinds of things that jiva is taking. So he's sticking to the promise of the Bhagavatam to be true to the Vedanta and to be true to the Vedic teachings, and at the same time to accommodate the spirit of bhakti and the teachings of bhakti. So we're going on here in this, especially to this particular. Yesterday I went through this whole thing. It's probably a good thing for me to go through it. I've been saying that one reading is one. I've been working here at the Jiva Institute for several years now. I started with Bhagavad Sandarbha, so I didn't really. I did some later touches on Tattva Sandarbha, but the thorough study, supposedly Bhagavad Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, Bhakti Sandarbha, supposedly gone through these all thoroughly. But I would say that this thorough study has not been quite as thorough as one would like. Nevertheless, you have Sravanam, and then Mananam, and then Nididhyasanam. So these are the three stages of the Jnana path, as explained also as a part of the Vichara path for a bhakta. So Jiva Goswami and Bhakti Sandarbha talks about Vichara Pradhan and Ruchi Pradhan. So most of the devotees are Ruchi Pradhan. And even the Vichar Pradhan devotees are eager to be finished with the Vichar. The conclusion is there. The conclusion is that we should engage in bhakti. Srotavya kirtitavyascha smartatavyascha chadhabhayam. Now that's the kind of thing that we're more interested in getting right into the juice. That muhuraho rasika pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam. Muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. We want what need is there for anything more than the Bhagavatam? Kimanyai shastra vistarai. And so on. These are the things that inspire the devotees to try and go further. But we always end up with various kinds of doubts, the samshaya, viparit bhavana, asambhavana, these kinds of things are that we think that this can't be the case, this is impossible, and so on and so forth. And we find that mutual contradictory statements, and these hold us back from devotion. These hold us back. Intellectually, we're held back. The mind holds us back. The intelligence, the function of the intelligence is not just simply to know something, right? The function of the willpower, but the will belongs to the intelligence. So if you know, vyavasayatmika buddhi, ekeha kuru nandana, bahushakha hyanantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. So the vyavasayatmika buddhi. So buddhi means the vyavasayatmika. It means power, the will, the portion of the will that is dominated. The portion of the intelligence that governs the will. So when we talk about the higher, that indriyani paranyahur, indriyebhyah parang manaha, manasastu para buddhir, yo buddhe paratastu saha. So the buddhi, the function of the material intelligence, is to give us the will, and the ultimate purpose of the will is to direct us on the path of spiritual life. So the intelligence powers our capacity to overcome doubt. In the Gita, Krishna says, agyas cha asradadhanas cha. Agyas cha asradadhanas cha saṅśayātmā vinashyati. So on the path of spiritual life, if one is ignorant, if one doesn't have the proper knowledge, that's at the end of the 4th chapter, right, where he says that nahi jnānena sadrisham pavitram iha vidyate. There's nothing purer in this world than knowledge, meaning this knowledge that directs us to devotion to Krishna. So if one is ignorant of this knowledge, if one is lacking faith, or if one is perturbed by doubts, then his progress will become disturbed. So those people who are more intelligent, they should take up the study of the scripture. Here at the Jiva Institute, Satyanarayana Das Babaji Maharaj, who is, I'm the humble servant at this point. I suppose that my ego always tries to escape and to do something else other than serve. But the service of a Vaishnava, there could be nothing more pleasing for a devotee than to have the shelter of another devotee and to be able to engage in service. So leaving aside my own desires for pratishtha and my own desires for a following and for name, fame, and glory. Pratisthāsha dṛṣṭā śvapaca ramani me hridinate. If that witch, that brazen witch of the desire for pratishtha dances in my heart, well, how will the pure goddess of devotion take up her residence there? So the position here is that what we are doing in this study of the Priti Sandarbha, it's really the first Shravanam. And as I do this, I'm trying theoretically, I'm trying to do one a day. And so that means that I'm spending most of my time looking up texts and trying to find references and looking back again at the Paramatma Sandarbha, Tattva Sandarbha, looking at the commentaries in the Upanishads and so on and so forth in order to try to understand most clearly what is being said. And so actually mananam, so some mananam is going on, some reflection is going on, and very little nididhyasana. So I'd have to go through the whole thing again, from beginning to end, from Tattva Sandarbha all the way to Priti Sandarbha, and do it 2 more times before I'd be able to communicate with you in an authoritative way. And if you want authority, then you have to go to Babaji. And here you're getting the dribbles and drabbles that fall from this study that I am doing on the texts that have been prepared by Babaji, and to try to improve at least the English a little bit, and to make it a little bit more scholarly and a little bit more true to the scholarly exigencies of the academic world, and in that way increase the value of these Sandarbhas. The Sandarbhas are actually the most important books that we have in terms of our philosophical basis. And so and what we are trying to do here at the Jiva Institute, and what I'm, the kind of the service that I'm trying to play my small role in this is to just raise the quality of the production, so that this 6 Sandarbhas, that these editions will be the standard in the English language for some time to come. Right, so that is my pratigya, and I would like to go on now, and we'll enter into this. Today, I would just like to say it is hot season here in Vrindavan. The temperature today will go up above 40 degrees, and this is, of course, for me, is the perfect time really for bhajan. So this is when one is in the hot season in Vrindavan, then one will learn what bhajan is really all about. Most people escape at this time of year. We're in lockdown here for this COVID-19 virus. It's a rather strange event in human history that we're having this worldwide scare. But, and we've been here for now 7 weeks now. I think that we've been confined to the Jiva Institute premises, and some people have managed to escape. I personally don't mind so much. I'm pretty much locked down all the time. But of course, occasionally, and the sight of the deities in Vrindavan, Radha Raman, Radha Damodar, this is at least periodically the Jamuna, Keshi Ghat. To see these places is one of the great pleasures of being resident in the Dham, as well as to see the Vaishnavas, the friends who I've made over the years. It's nice to see them sometimes. Jai Sri Radhe. So, 5.4, so the point here is that I think that the title we're giving now is that there is, oh my Lord, the title. Well, the title I think that I gave it. You see, yesterday I went through this whole thing yesterday and ended up having to cancel it because the sound was not good. And as a matter of fact, I don't know. I'm hoping that the sound is good, and I've hopefully fixed the problem. But if I haven't fixed the problem, well, then we're in serious trouble. All right, so the point here is that this is about the bhed, jiva bhed. Is the jiva, does the jiva become one when the statements in the Shastra that say that the jiva mixes or enters. So the first example that we're giving here, he's giving an example. He's using a text from viṣṇu-dharme Purana. So the example, I'm not sure that I'd have to check to see, but the example, generally speaking, given is of the air, the ghatakash and the patakash, right? So ghatakash means the air or the ether, akasha. The ether that is contained in a pot and the ether that is all-pervading, that those two are one, and when one breaks the pot, then they mix together, and then there's no more difference between them. So that's taken that the individual jiva loses his individuality. And so there are many different kinds of statements of this kind. When the drop of water falls into the ocean, that it loses its individuality and becomes a part of the ocean. So too the living being, when he dies, just like the material body, when it dies, and then it merges back into Prakriti, and within a few short days, it is reassimilated back. The elements break down into their constituent parts, and there is no more individual body, but it is simply a part of the 5 elements of the gross material nature. So in the same way, the mind merges into the subtle energies, and so too it is with the soul. The individual soul merges into Brahman, and there's no more separate existence. But of course, that there is a delay, because unless one is situated in Brahma Gyan, that unity or that oneness does not take place. So this is this is the subject that Jiva Goswami is going to tackle. So as I think I may have stated before, Jiva Goswami, usually his procedure is not to start with the easy verses. You know, this is the way, I remember that Ananta Vasudeva Puridas, that he was critical of a book that the Gaudiya Math put out, which is called Gaudiya Kantahar. And he says, Gaudiya Kantahar, it gives you the concluding statements, and it doesn't give you the argumentation. So the people use the quotations from the scriptures as a kind of a stick with which to beat the opponent. So Jiva Goswami doesn't really do it that way. What Jiva Goswami does is he quotes a problematic verse where the something is being stated that apparently seems to present the opposing view, and he shows how that does not really show the opposing view. He shows how it can be interpreted otherwise. And then as he develops, as we'll see in today's talk or in today's reading, that as he progresses, he finds stuff that will find statements in the scriptures that will support his idea. So so he starts with the difficult stuff and then proceeds on to the easier stuff. That's the way he works. He'll establish his siddhanta through argumentation with the problematic texts. And then once the problematic texts have been dealt with, then he'll start to show the texts that are clearer and support his side of the idea. And that will when that happens, then things become freer and more joyful. Less of a but one starts by climbing the hurdle. Right. So let's just read these verses. So this is a group of 7 verses from the viṣṇu-dharme Purana. And I don't believe these verses have been quoted anywhere else. So many of the verses that we're going to see today, especially from the Upanishads, have been quoted before in Tattva Sandarbha and Paramatma Sandarbha, but these are not. So bhinne dṛtau yathā vāyur naivanya saha vāyuna kṣīṇa-puṇyāgha-bandhas tu tathatma brahmana saha. So just as when a bellow, the driti, when a driti is torn, the inside air is not other than the air outside. So it's a rather interesting way of saying it. He says not other with the air. So it usually, it's not other with the air would be a literal translation. But anyway, so the idea, it's not other than the air outside. So it's with the air. and it's not other. So not being not other, it mixes with the air, let's say. So kṣīṇa-puṇyāgha-bandhas too. So similarly, a person who has become free of the bondage of sin and piety is not other than Brahman. So there's a statement that's using that familiar example of the air inside the pot here. He's not, rather than using the example of a pot, he's using the example of a bellows. You know, the bellows, bastra or driti. And the air that's inside, when you tear that bastra, when it's broken, then the air escapes, and it becomes mixed with the air outside. I don't know if a bastra is there. Anyway, we'll just accept that that's the it could be any kind of flask or something like that. So it's not really it's quite similar to gharta in terms of it's just using a different symbol of the separating what separates the individual consciousness from the transcendent, all-pervading consciousness. So a person who has become free from that that duality caused by pious deeds, by karmas, once he's free of that, he becomes one with Brahman. So I'll read through the rest here. You can see the 7 verses. Tataha samasta-kalyāṇa-samasta-sukha-sampadām ahladam anyam akalang kamapnoti shashvatam brahma-svarūpasya tatha hyatmano nityadaiva saha vyuthana-kāle rajendra astehi atirohitaha. So then he attains the other, eternal, spotless bliss of all the treasures, of all happiness, and all auspiciousness. This bliss of the self, who has attained the nature of Brahman, is eternal. Even in his external awareness, O king, it does not fade away. So here, I'll come to the end, and Jiva Goswami doesn't make many commentaries on this, but we'll have to go over it again. So adarshasya malabhavat vaimalyam kashate yathā jñānāgni-dagdha-heyasya sa halado hyatmanas tatha. So yathā tatha. So just as a mirror, when the dirt has been cleansed away, then its pure original state is revealed. Vaimalyam kashate. So similarly, when the impurities that cover the self are removed by the fire of knowledge, then one experiences the bliss, one sees the bliss, the hlada of the soul, the hlada of the self, the joy of the self. So yathā heya-guṇa-dhvaṁsād avabodhādayo guṇāh prakāṣante najanyante nitya-ādi hite. So just as when the rejectable qualities are destroyed, the other and qualities such as self-awareness of a bodha manifest. They are not created because they are the eternal qualities of the self. Najanyante. Nitya evatmano guna. Jnanam, vairagyam, aishwaryam, dharmascha manujeshvara, atmano brahma-bhūtasya, nityam eva chatushtayam. O Master of Men, consciousness, detachment from matter, majesty, and dharma, these 4 are the eternal qualities of a self that has realized Brahman. Etad advaitam akyatam esha tava taboditaha ayang viṣṇur idang brahma tataitad satyam uttamam. So this is called Advaita. This alone was spoken by you. This is Vishnu, this is Brahman, and this is the supreme reality. This is the supreme truth. So those are the 7 verses. So now Jiva says, Atra jīva-brahmaṇor aṁśatve'pi vāyu-dṛṣṭāntaḥ. So a dṛṣṭāntaḥ, there's often the word dṛṣṭāntaḥ means an example, or so it is simile or an example. So in any simile, there are parts that are accepted. His face is as red as an apple. Well, in some cases you have apples that are not red, or maybe, you may say he looks just like an apple, right? Her face is like the moon. Let's look at a more conventional example. She has a moon-like face. Her face is like the moon. Well, when you look at and then they might say, but the moon has flaws, whereas her face has no flaws. So, or comparing the face or the feet to a lotus flower. Well, obviously in all these examples, there's some part that's being accepted, and there's other parts that are not being accepted, right? If I say that her face is like the moon, well, it doesn't mean it's round and shiny just like the moon. It has some effulgence, it has some roundness, you see, but doesn't mean that they're like the moon. There are all these spots, or that there is no eyes, no mouth, no nose. So any simile is never 100% exactly the same, because if 2 things are exactly the same, well, then there's no way of making a simile. So even that in the Alankara Shastra, it says that there's a way that they say that he is equal to himself alone, right? That when one runs out of things to say, you say there's no one like Krishna. Krishna is equal to himself, and there's no one else who can be compared to him. So this is also a kind of alankar, a kind of a poetic or a rhetorical flourish that one can use when one comes to the conclusion of other failed similes or other failed metaphors. But there's always some aspect of a metaphor that is inadequate or doesn't apply. If you take the wrong part of a metaphor, then it doesn't apply. So here Jiva Goswami is saying, yes, we accept this metaphor of the air mixing with the air, that's the element of the part and the whole, the part becoming one with the whole. And that part is being accepted, but not the part that it loses its individuality. And in the rest of the examples that are there, and that will be shown. How is that? Well, because he says, aṁśatve'pi bahirangatvam tu anyato gyeyam. So one of the things that was said, that the photon of light is simultaneously a part of the gestalt, of the totality, the whole of the sun. The sun includes the orb of the sun, but also the energies, the light and the heat and so on that are emanating from it. Those are not separate from the sun, and yet at the same time they are separate. So the word bahirangatvam has been used, that the jiva is bahiranga, that he is separate. And how can we tell? Well, because of the word anya, or because there's something different. So even after the air has mixed with the air, there's still going to be something that's different. The 2 things are different. And how is that? Well, he says here, he attains the other eternal spotless bliss of all the treasures of happiness and all auspiciousness. And it says that even in his external awareness, so how can he have still an external awareness if he's merged into Brahman, right? So he says that even in his external awareness, that consciousness of his belonging to the supreme whole is not lost. So this is all these things. The word that we'll come across in the next bit is tadatmyam, that he has attained a oneness without losing his distinction. Right? When the mirror is cleared, then its individual properties shine forth, and it has individual properties, right? These individual properties like jnanam, consciousness, vairagyam, indifference to the externals, to indifference to the non-truth, and indifference and dharma. So dharma here is the big one, because dharma means its own activity. So the jiva has its own dharmas, even in its pure state, that it doesn't have, like in strict speaking of Advaita, that Brahma doesn't have any dharma. It doesn't have any dharmas. It's Satchidananda, but those are not dharmas. Those are, nor are they gunas. They're not visheshanas. They're not anything that describes Brahman. They're just, that is what Brahman is. It is being. It is consciousness without any object of consciousness. It is ananda, but without, it's ananda in the state of ananda, not something that is the result of interaction with any other thing. Because in Brahman there are no parts for interactions to take place. Right? There's no swagata bheda. There's none of the kinds of differences that exist. It's completely homogeneous, eka rasa. So at the end he said, etad advaita makyatam. So this is the Advaita. So the Vaishnavas Advaita, we are not non-Advaitins. That's the whole point. That vadanti tattva vidas tattvam yajnanam advayam. So there's a jnanam advayam, that tattvam yajnanam advayam. It's a non-dual substance, but the non-dual substance, if one is strictly speaking going to philosophically insist on there not being any swagata bhed or vigata bhed, that these things are that the Advaita, it's Kevala Advaitavad, that there's nothing else, that there's only one thing with no distinctions, and that any distinction that one sees is a false illusion. All those things are not a part of the Vaishnava's Advaita philosophy. So here the air is given as an example of the jiva and Brahma being part and whole. The state of the jiva being external to Brahman, although a part of it, is because of the other, which is Maya. Or Maya, the internal Maya, external Maya, in either case. And there's something that intercedes or that interferes with the individual consciousness and its awareness of its relationship, its oneness with the Supreme. So, ataha pṛthag-īśvare svarūpa-bhūtānubhave cha sati tad-vaimukhyenānādinā labdha-cchidrayeśa-māyayā tad-anubhava-lopādeḥ sambhavāt kathānchit sammukhyena tad-anugrahān nivrittiṣ-caivasti. All right, so this is just repeating some of the basic concepts, right? So since Ishvara and the self-awareness are separate, therefore there is the Maya energy of the Lord finds the defect of vaimukhya, of indifference. So this word vaimukhya and or bahirmukhata, antarmukhata, sammukhinata, all these words that have mukha in them, the face is turned away, vaimukhya. Right? So this face, the flaw of the jiva is that he has this anadi vaimukhya, that from the beginningless indifference to God. So that's the way the jiva, that's the way he was made. Why he was made that way, right? So that he could experience the bliss of finding God and coming to God. That's the purpose of this particular facet of God's creation, that the jiva can experience the bliss of finding, of discovering his true nature and discovering his real relationship with Krishna. Right? The material energy has a double purpose. One is to give bhoga, experience, independent experience, and also apavarga, to give liberation. So the giving of liberation, that's the giving of the experience of joy of the true self in bhakti. That is how God's mercy shines even on the suffering souls of this world, so that eventually they'll become free of their suffering. And how much greater it is to be happy after being freed from suffering than to be happy without ever having known suffering. So here it says, therefore, since God and the intrinsic experience of him in the jiva's nature are two separate things, there is a possibility for the jiva's experience of him to be lost due to God's maya, which finds the opportunity to overwhelm the jiva due to its defect of beginningless aversion to him. Because of that possibility, however, because of that possibility, however, so just as he can become bound by maya, so similarly, sammukhyenā, katanchit sammukhyenā, tad-anugrahān nivrittischasti. So because of that possibility, however, by becoming a little, somehow or another, by becoming a little favorable to God, the influence of maya is revoked by his grace. For it is said in Shruti, anandang brahmano vidvan. So we've seen that already before from the Taittiriya Upanishad, that anandang brahmano vidvan nakutaścana bibhyati, nakadācana bibhyati. So when one knows the bliss of Brahman, so the point that we made before, or the point that Jiva Goswami was making before from this particular Upanishadic verse from the Taittiriya Upanishad, was that there is a separation between the knower and the known. So that the ananda of Brahman, it's not the knowing the ananda of Brahman. And so there is a knower, and there is an experience, and then there is the distinction between the two. Right? It's the drashta, the drishya, and the darshana. So all these three things are present there. So the knower of the bliss of Brahman fears nothing. In other words, one can become free from fear or maya. Commentary by Babaji Maharaj. This set of verses, cited from Viṣṇu-dharme Purana, describes the process of Brahman realization. It does not match with the Advaitavada concept of Brahman realization. So it's a Puranic text. So the Puranic texts tend to use Vedantic language, but to push it towards the side of Dvaita. It clearly says that the jiva attains all auspiciousness and all happiness. It does not say that the jiva becomes happiness. He feels happiness. He feels happiness even when he is not in the state of samadhi or in the intuitive awareness of Brahman. This is called the vyuttana state. These verses also state that the jiva has four natural qualities, namely jnana, vairagya, aishwarya, and dharma. These qualities also have their material components or counterparts, as mentioned in the Sankhya Karika. This defies the Advaitic view that Brahman has no qualities. Even when Excuse me. Even when one has experienced Brahman, one does not lose one's separate existence. In this state, one becomes released from the influence of Maya and experiences Ananda. This is supported by the statement from Taittiriya Upanishad, one experiences the bliss of Brahman, one knows the bliss of Brahman. It does not say that one becomes Brahman. Of course, one has other statements that do say that, and those are the ones we're going to have to take a look at now. So that comes here. So this is now Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and this is actually Shankaracharya goes into a big explanation here, so that you can, if one has the patience to go and look at Shankaracharya's commentary, and to see many of the things that Jiva Goswami says have been anticipated by Shankara, but we are left that even so. And whose arguments are stronger? Well, that will have to depend on the observer, on the student. Anyhow, this is from 4.4.6 of the Brihadaranyaka. It says there, natasmata prana utkramanti atraiva samaviliyante brahmaiva san brahma-apyayasya. So the important part is the last part there, brahmaiva san brahma-apyayasya. So the word Brahma is repeated, brahmaiva san. So being nothing other than Brahman, he attains Brahman. The word apyayasya is also sometimes translated as merges, right? So it has let's say, slight span of meaning that incorporates both visions. Let's see what Jiva Goswami says. In the following statement, so the verse translation or that statement is a part of a larger statement. His vital forces do not leave the body, but merge right here. Being Brahman alone, he attains Brahman. So here he says, so ity-ādi anyo brahma-bhāvas tatanyo brahmani-apyayah iti spashtam. So very clearly, Jiva Goswami says that very clearly here, there's two separate things. One is the being of Brahman, and the second one is the attaining of Brahman. Right? So in this statement, it is clear that being Brahma conscious, or Brahma-bhava, I don't think that consciousness is probably not adequate here. This is the state of Brahmanness is one thing, and the attainment of Brahman is another. So the Brahma being, Brahma-bhūyāya kalpate, that the beingness of Brahman, one becomes Brahman, one is in the state of Brahma, and in that state one attains Brahma. So there's two kinds of Brahma being talked about here. That's what it would seem. So what it says in that statement, the preceding part, was that tasmat lokat punar eti asmai lokaya karmana iti nu kamayamano. So the one returns to this world if one has desires. That's the first thing that's being said. But then if one has no desires, akamayamano. And if the akamayamano, then there's four kinds of words that are used. There's akama, one who has no desires. Nishkama, one who has erased desires. There's aptakama, one who has realized his desires. And atmakama, one who has desires the self. So Shankaracharya in his commentary there, he makes that a progression that that one has attained his desires. Well, how has he attained his desires? by desiring the self. That's how he has become free of desire, by desiring his spiritual state. That's how he has done it. So then, for such a person, the rest of the sentence is there, that he is a jivan mukta, and so his vital forces do not leave the body, but merge right here, and being Brahman, he attains Brahman. So Jiva says here, brahma-bhāvānantaraṁ tad-apyayasya punar-abhidhānāt. So the word Brahman is mentioned twice because even after becoming Brahman, he attains Brahman. So there you have the two kinds of Brahman. So becoming the Brahman and then attaining the Brahman. So what are these two Brahmans, right? Brahma-bhūta prasanatma na shochati na kaṅśati samak-sarveshu bhūteshu mad-bhaktiṃ labhate param. This is what's being stated here. That after becoming Brahman, after becoming one with Brahman, then one attains Brahman. So after one has attained one's spiritual essence as being, having that oneness of quality with the Supreme, then one can attain the Supreme. One can attain Krishna, right? Na devo devam yajeta. You can't worship God if you are not a God yourself. Right? If you don't have the characteristics or the qualities of the divine clear within you, you cannot come close to God in order to worship Him. So, apyayasya karmataya brahma-nirdeśāc. So, this is clear because the attainment of Brahman is stated as coming after one has become Brahman. Furthermore, apyayasya karmataya brahma-nirdeśāc. So, furthermore, Brahman is stated as the object, karma, of the verb to attain, apyayati. Right? So if karma, so there's a duality is being presented. Remember yesterday or in the last lecture, I went and we were discussing Shankaracharya's commentary a little bit, and he was talking about the verb. So that action, any action requires a karta, a doer, it requires an object. So here we have a separation of the agent who is attaining Brahman. So Brahman is the object. So Brahma attains Brahma. One Brahma attains the other Brahma. Being Brahma, he attains Brahma. So this division of Brahma into both subject and object indicates that there is a distinction between the two, and that distinction between the two has to be understood according to the philosophy of devotion. Tatascha brahmaiva san iti tat samya tat tadatmya apatyaiva abheda nirdesha. So now what is the nature? So what are they? Two of them, he has attained Brahman. Brahman has attained Brahman. So what is that? What is the upshot of that? What is the meaning of that? So Jiva says that the first is brahmaiva san, the being of Brahman. It means that he has attained tadatmya. He has acquired similar properties, right? This becoming Brahma alone is the description of non-difference is in the sameness due to acquiring similar properties. So the word samya and tadatmya, that these things are not exactly merging or becoming totally non-different. Even if we use the word, I think Babaji says this in the commentary, even if we talk about oneness, it's two things becoming one, so there's still the two-ness is there also. In the definition of tadatmya is while keeping, that when one thing takes on the properties of another due to proximity, while keeping its independent existence, that is called tadatmya. Interestingly, there in the we have this example given from the Rasa You might remember in the Rasa in the 30th chapter, when Krishna disappears, so separated from the gopis, that the gopis become so totally merged in thought of Krishna that they become tadatmika. So tadatmika and tadatmyam, obvious that tat atma, one's self becomes that. That's the meaning. Yeah? So the quality of having one's self becoming something else, that's called tadatmya. But the expression tadatmya prapta or tadatmya panna, that indicates that the one thing has not entirely become the other. Just like a rod, the classical example is the iron rod, which is placed in a fire, takes on the properties of heat and light of the fire, but never becomes the fire itself. So this is the classical example that we use for tadatmya panna. And so samya, in certain aspects, there is similarity, and that similarity is derived from this proximity and absorption. It's a nice further instance that in that same verse, the commentaries on that verse in the Rasa Lila, that Srinath Chakravarti's Chaitanya Mata Manjusha, he says, Tadatmyang nama premnah paraya maryadaya Chaitaso vrityantara bhavena tanmayi bhava. So here he's equating it to the tanmayi bhava, to be of this total absorption. That through reaching the higher limits of prema, that there is no other vritti. I hear the use of vritti, mano vritti or chaitaso vritti, that the functions of the mind, all other functions of the mind have disappeared, and the only function of the mind is that which is absorbed in Krishna. And Vishwanath goes on to to say the following, saying that Krishno nanyatra gatavan. So Krishna has not gone anywhere else. Right? So now the gopis, they say Krishna has not gone anywhere else. He's disappeared. Right? He is mayeva pravishta. He has entered into me. He has entered into me. So tad ahameva Krishna. I am Krishna. And so thinking like that, they started to engage in the pastimes of Krishna. So when they were doing that, engaging in pastimes of Krishna, some of the gopis, they behaved like demons. One became Putana. Sometimes they behaved like the other cowherd boys. So they took on these different roles. So when they took on the roles, one gopi is playing the role of Krishna, another one is playing the role of Putana. But they're both engaged. It's not that, some people say, well, they all became Krishna, so this is the example of Advaita Bhav. Well, it is example of Advaita Bhav, but the Vaishnava Advaita Bhav. Because there, in the Leela, so all the Leelas, those Leelas are also a part of Krishna's internal potency. So even if one of the gopis was playing the role of Putana, in terms of its being Krishna's Leela, there was another gopi who was playing the role of Krishna. So they got to enjoy that awareness of Krishna's activities. And that awareness of Krishna's activities was total absorption. Tadatmya prapta, attaining oneness through proximity, or oneness through total absorption in thought. So the individuality is not lost. The gopis are still enjoying Krishna's Leela. They're experiencing the bliss of thinking of Krishna, of seeing Krishna in the mind's eye, of seeing Krishna reflected in the other gopis' absorption. And in that way, they're not separated from Krishna, but they're one with Krishna. At the same time, they're not totally absorbed into a state of indifference and oneness. So evam brahmaiva veda brahma veda brahmaiva bhavati ityatrapi vyakyam. So the same explanation should be given to the statement, the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. So it's exactly the same, the idea that there's a distinction. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. So you have the oneness and difference are both the division of Brahman. And that's from Mundaka Upanishad 3.2.9. And there's another one. So it says, Kvachit ekatva shabdenaiva api tathaivocyate. So the word ekatva, oneness, so when we talk about Brahman, Kaivalya, and so on, that ekatvam is also sometimes being used in the same way. As in Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.3, well, one has to look at that, and also in Bhagavad Gita 14.2. Well, I come to the end of my time slot here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the next one immediately now. So continue on with the next part, this last part of the fifth section, the fifth anucheda is a long section, as I said. So it's divided into two parts. And the first part, I really see it as being the extension of section 4 of Anucheda 4, because, and you'll see at the end, it still continued to be a commentary on the verses from the first canto that were in the third and fourth Anuchedas. So let's stop there for now and follow along. I'm going to give the text in the blog, and you can go and look there. And those who have a little bit of Sanskrit knowledge, at least take the time to read it along and to follow along in there. And also there will be a few notes, such as texts from other, or like where partial quotes are given. I'll give the full quotes and maybe a translation and so on, so that you can supplement your understanding. Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe Shyam. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Purnam madah purnam midam, purnat purnam udachyate, purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe, Jai Jai Sri Radhe Shyam. I think I'm going to drop that Sarve Bhavantu. I think Jai Jai Sri Radhe Shyam is quite enough. Jai Jai Sri Radhe.